Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today I'm going to show you how to apply a melamine lacquer finish. Melamine lacquer's been around on the market for I think close to or over 100 years now, and it's a very durable, hard-wearing finish that's often overlooked by woodturners in the last 20-30 years or so just because there's so many other finishes on the market. I'll go over some of the tips and tricks I've learned in applying this and reasons why you should probably start looking at melamine for maybe your go-to finish on a project handle or things where you need a very durable finish. The project I'll be applying the melamine lacquer to is a nice project handle. This is going to be for an ice cream scoop. The piece is some stabilized koa, so it's a nice durable material, but I want a really durable high gloss finish. I want to retain the close to the feel wood surface you get with these types of finishes over a CA finish. CA finishes usually leave a plasticky feel to them, and I want this to retain that natural warmth and natural feel to it. So that's why I'll be using the melamine lacquer. It's a durable, really hard finish that's used in place of a nitrocellulose lacquer. A lot of instrument makers like this stuff as well because you can get a super high gloss if you want to really add a lot of coats to it. But for this piece, we'll probably do 2 to 3 coats. But we'll also be using the cellulose sanding sealer to give us a really good base, then the melamine lacquer, and then we'll put a protective top coat of wax just to help increase the shine a little bit and the protectability or protective coating we have on the wood surface. So the first thing we need to do is apply our cellulose sanding sealer. So let's get set up for that. Alright, for our cellulose sanding sealer, I've got my blank prepped. This has been sanded up to 1500 grit with some steel wool and some of the Merlon non-woven pads. So I've got rid of any radial scratches or any scratch marks from the paper, which with this finish, because it's so high gloss, you will see scratch marks. So make sure you take time to prep the blank properly. The reason we use the sanding sealer first is that'll give us a nice even base for our melamine lacquer to apply on top of, and it'll help seal up all the end grain fibers we have here on the ends and give us a better, more protected finish. So I've got a small section of cloth. I'll saturate that, get a good heavy coat on our rag, and then just wipe this on. You can use a brush, you can use a sponge, just something to help heavily saturate these fibers, let that penetrate in there. The cellulose sanding sealer has a lot of solvents in there, so that'll help cut through some of the natural oils in whatever woods you're using, and it'll also help it penetrate deeper into the wood fibers. I'm using gloves. Obviously you don't want to really come into contact with the solvents. Try and minimize contact as best you can, so make sure you wear some gloves. If you do have a respirator with some charcoal filters, go ahead and use that, or make sure you have some good ventilation because this stuff is pretty fumy. Just making sure to coat every surface. Make sure I've got a good heavy base down. If there's any areas that still look a little dry, go ahead and apply another thick coat to that. Those end grain fibers especially, those will wick in that sanding sealer. And now we can put the cap on this. With these rags are flammable, so make sure you straighten them out, hang these to air dry them. Let the solvents cure out of those and evaporate before you throw them in the garbage can. Next, I'll take a clean section of rag and we'll buff dry the finish. Help that cure over pretty quick. The nice thing about that sanding sealer is it does dry very fast, and with a little extra friction from a rag, it'll help that process even quicker. When you're buffing with the rags on, these gloves on, they get a little tacky on the surface, so make sure you're really only contacting with your cloth or your paper towel. And then we'll just buff dry the finish. So we have a pretty good sheen already. We'll set my rag off to the side for just a moment. And now we can use some steel wool to denib the surface. Sometimes when you put sanding sealer on the surface, you might get some streaks depending on how you apply it. The steel wool will just knock those down and then give that surface just a little more abrasive surface for that melamine lacquer to bite into and really adhere really well. So now we should have a really smooth surface. I'll get my clean rag again and just remove any dust. And now we're ready to apply our melamine lacquer to the surface. So the sanding sealer as well helps even out the color in your material. That way whatever finish you use doesn't darken or discolor it in any way. But with the melamine lacquer, This is a pretty clear, milky finish to it, so it's not going to darken wood too much. But we want to give it a good shake before you apply it, because the solids sometimes they will settle. Alright, so get your cap and set that off to the side. We'll get our clean rag. I'll fold this over into a nice little spongy applicator and heavily saturate your cloth. The melamine lacquer gets really tacky and dries very fast, so we will want to apply this kind of in sections, and I'll be brushing it from the headstock end towards the tailstock until the rag gets tacky on the surface, and then I'll apply some more melamine to my rag. Okay, once you feel the rag start to tack onto the surface a little bit, just add a little more melamine to your rag. And I will say this, the melamine is very strong as far as fumes go, so make sure you're working in a well-ventilated shop or you're wearing a respirator. Okay, once you have a good even coat on the surface, I'm going to do the end of the handle. The reason I like to work from the headstock towards the tailstock is that way I don't have radial streaking. And then you can always, if you do have some streaks, you can always throw some more finish on the rag, and the solvent will help level that back out. Okay, so that's going to be our first coat of the melamine. I'll get my rag and set this off to the side. Make sure you lay them out so where they can air dry and evaporate. I'll throw my cap back on there just so the finish doesn't cure over in my can. And then I'll turn my lathe on at a slow RPM and just let this air dry for just a moment. I'll give this about 30 seconds to a minute. Let that cure over. We can throw another coat on, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I've let this set up for a couple of minutes. 30 seconds to a minute, this stuff will tack up really well, and now we can kind of friction buff dry it a little bit. So I'll bump my speed up. And then just light pressure for a moment, make sure everything's tacked over pretty well and it's not still wet. If the finish is wet, it'll definitely take the rag out of your hand. The cool thing about the melamine is that when you burnish it with a clean rag, it actually increases the shine and buffs that surface, and it makes that gloss level bump up to a next level. So it's actually a really cool finish. I overlook this finish a lot. It's one of those finishes that's been around super long, and I thought because it's been around for so long it might be outdated. But I think there's really a time and place for this finish. And a project handle like this where I want durability, but I want to retain that wood feel close to the wood finish, but also have a high gloss, this is really where the melamine lacquer is going to shine. Alright, so now that we've buff dried our first coat, I'll slow the lathe down, we'll turn it off, and we'll add on another coat to it. But you can see the gloss level we have just from a single coat of this. It's very similar as far as gloss level to a friction polish, but it's going to be more durable as well. So saturate your rag nice and heavy again. And then we'll go again just from the head towards the tailstock, brushing this on. Once that rag starts tacking to the surface, apply some more finish to the rag. That's going to help things keep moving nice and smooth. And this finish, you really can make it as high gloss as you want. So if the more coats you put on, the higher the level of gloss goes. Like I said earlier, the furniture makers and the guitar makers, instrument makers, they really love this stuff because it's kind of a replacement for the nitrocellulose lacquers they usually use. And I've seen some guitar bodies that have an absolute mirror gloss to them with this finish on there. They'll put 7 to 10 coats on and then they'll buff it out. And that process takes a lot more work and time. But on pieces like that, that's where you really want to do it. On a piece like this, we'll put on 2 to 3 coats. I have a minimum of 2. 3, you'll get just a little extra sheen. Maybe a little more durability just because you'll have a little bit thicker finish. But 2 coats is usually what I'll do on something like this. All right, now that we have our second coat on, I'll set my rag out again, and then we'll turn the lathe on at a low speed and just let this air dry. I'll see you guys in just a second. All right, so we've let our second coat cure over and harden up a little bit, and now we can buff this out. So let's bump our speed back up to 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, and just nice light friction on our clean rag. It's going to burnish that finish, increase the gloss level, and smooth it out as well. If you really wanted to go the next step, you could let this sit for a few days to fully harden after, I think they say 7 days, to fully cure and be completely hardened. You know, you could build up a bunch of layers that way if you wanted an absolute mirror gloss. But the gloss level we're getting right now after just the 2 coats is about as high as I want to go for this piece. Another time I like to use this finish is something like on a tool handle where I want a good tactile feel to it, but a nice protective gloss finish. You know, on a small handle or tool handles I like to do it on as well. So it's interesting though, when you burnish the melamine, it just increases the gloss, makes it look nice and rich, and helps smooth it out. If I was going to be doing like a 7-layer coat for a mirror gloss, I'd probably cut this back a little bit with some 2500 grit Merlon between the 4th and 5th coats, just to help smooth it out and then keep building on those layers. But for the melamine, I think we're about done with the melamine lacquer itself. So I've got a really high gloss. I don't have any brush marks or anything for my paper towel, and I can still see the wood grain throughout the finish, and it retains that nice tactile feel to it. So as far as the melamine process goes, that's complete, but I will throw a protective coat of wax on there just to give that little extra step of protection. This is just the Mylands wax. It's a blend of carnauba and beeswax. And it's really easy to work with. It's got a fair amount of solvents in the wax, so it spreads really easily. This is a really good protective top coat for pepper mills and kitchen projects. Something that people can reapply at home really easily off the lathe as well. All right, now that we have a good layer of wax on there, I'm just going to buff that into the surface with our rag. All right, so now that we've buffed the wax blend into the surface, let's stop the lathe and take this off and show you what kind of gloss level we have with that melamine lacquer. So we have a super high gloss, non-darkening finish that enhances the wood grain but still leaves that nice tactile close to the wood finish, but it's also super protective as well. So I'll set this aside for a few more days just to let that finish in there fully harden before I use it. But that's how you apply a melamine lacquer. And if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below. And if you want to watch any more wood turning videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel.